Hello, thank you so much for joining us at today's event. My name is Jeff Reichard. I work in the product strategy team in the Office of the Chief Technology Officer at Veeam Software. And I'm joined today by Gil Vega, Veeam's Chief Information Security Officer. Thanks for being here, Gil.
Hey, Jeff, happy to join you again.
Awesome. So before we begin, there are just a couple of quick housekeeping points that I'd like to cover. First off, please, if you have questions about anything that Gil or I touch on in today's talk about where we are currently with cybersecurity and where we see things going over the course of the next year, please do put them in the chat. We have Veeam experts standing by to answer your questions in real time, and we'll be delighted to take care of those. If you would like more information, or if you would like to dig into any other topics about Veeam, please also stop by our virtual booth. We will be having a prize drawing, and we have local technical experts from your local sales teams standing by that can answer your questions, that can help you with anything that you'd like to know about the full set of Veeam capabilities. And we also have additional resources and links that can give you some in-depth information, both about cybersecurity and about Veeam's broader capabilities in backup. So let's jump in. I'd like to start just so that people know what your background is, Gil. Can you give everyone that's listening today a little bit of information about who you are, what you've done in the past, and how you ended up as the Chief Information Security Officer here at Veeam?
Yeah, Jeff, happy to talk a little bit about my background. I'm really looking forward to getting to the questions. I've been at Veeam as the first Chief Information Security Officer for the company since February of 2020, so about a year and a half. Prior to that, I was a CISO and Managing Director in financial services for a systemically important financial utility here in the United States. But a lot of my background, more than 15 years, comes from my time in Washington, D.C., where I was a member of the Senior Executive Service for the United States government. My last role there was as CISO for the Department of Energy, where I ran cybersecurity programs covering the Department of Energy's nuclear weapons complex, national laboratories. And I also worked at a few Department of Defense agencies, as well as intelligence community agencies inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C.
Okay, so clearly you have a background that involves protecting very, very important assets and making sure that both in the private sector and in your public service that you keep information assets safe from different kinds of threat actors. So perfect background for the conversation we're going to be having today. Let's start talking about current trends in cybersecurity by focusing on ransomware. It's in the news constantly. Gil, what can you tell us about the current ransomware situation in the UK and Ireland today?
It's a very dangerous and dynamic threat environment. The adversaries are highly motivated. The criminal gangs understand that there's a lot of money to be made. There are cyber insurance policies now that are paying out higher and higher ransoms. We've got companies that are being attacked that are procuring the services of professional negotiators to handle their ransomware payments. There are companies preparing themselves day by day to deal with this threat. And frankly, oftentimes that makes it easier for these illicit transactions to be completed. Ransom payments using some type of crypto through some type of negotiated service that you've added onto your cyber policy or into your incident response. The bottom line here is that small to large businesses continue to remain at very high risk. In the UK and Ireland, there continues to be an extreme focus on healthcare concerns, hospitals, clinics, National Health Service. Those types of areas are seeing unprecedented levels of attack as it relates to ransomware. You know, the good news about all of this is that ransomware as a specific cybersecurity threat has really been elevated to a top corporate concern globally, not just in Europe. So more and more companies are understanding the almost existential nature of some of these ransomware threats, and some of these groups that are perpetrating these crimes against Western-based businesses, particularly, and we're talking about the UK and Ireland today, focused in those in those markets. They're automating their attacks. They are distributing their attacks. They're selling their malware on the deep web to anyone that's willing to buy it. And this concept of ransomware as a service, where they are acting as a supplier to other criminal gangs of malware that can be easily used to target any company globally, is a trend that we saw starting to pick up late last year, and I think that's going to continue to be a significant concern for companies going forward.
That's interesting. You've touched on, I was going to ask you basically what's changed. The situation is terrible. I think you and I talked earlier about the interview with Jeremy Fleming of GCHQ, where he said earlier this month that in the UK, ransomware attacks actually doubled in the past year, which is really appalling to think about. And some of the reasons that you just pointed out for that, the rise of ransomware as a service, the increasing automation of the threat, are certainly behind that. I'm curious, though, when you read about this, you also read about data being stolen and exposed, sort of double and triple extortion attacks that are going on now. Is that something that you hear about when you talk with customers as well?
Absolutely, and I think it goes to the point that I make with a lot of our customers about focusing on the fundamentals of cybersecurity, defense in depth, establishing a different philosophy when it comes to cybersecurity, and that is understanding that breaches today are not only highly impactful, they're highly effective against companies that just aren't prepared. So sophisticated actors are leveraging zero-day exploits in greater numbers. The efficacy of these attacks is very, very good, and I think if companies can change their philosophical approach to cybersecurity and assume a constant state of breach, I think it allows them really to focus on resiliency as a key component of any strategic cybersecurity company. Resiliency means being able to take a punch and punch back. And
right.
in the context of cybersecurity, that means focusing on the fundamentals, building resilient systems, having excellent capabilities around detection and monitoring, and then being able to reestablish services that are impacted by cybersecurity attacks, being able to recover from those inevitable attacks. So when you talk about this triple threat of ransomware, it's all related. There are gangs that will criminal gangs that will obviously attack you with ransomware, but if they can establish a toehold and escalate privileges, obviously they'll steal your data. So focusing on the fundamentals, understanding when there are anomalies in your environment will certainly help companies be able to detect these types of attacks. And obviously the threat of exposure of that private information is another significant concern that companies have these days, especially in Europe with lots of different privacy regimes that are attempting to protect the privacy of EU citizens and so forth. So it's a significant concern that I think is going to continue to grow over time.
I know in conversations that you and I have had with customers in the past, and also internally at Veeam, the whole topic of defense in depth and having a comprehensive framework for your security practice and making that risk-based is something that you've driven in the organization a lot. And specifically, when you've done it here at Veeam, you've talked a lot about the NIST cybersecurity framework. That's something I think that you're talking with customers about all over the world when you have these conversations too, right?
It is, and that's certainly a US-centric risk management framework, but what we're seeing is an adoption of that framework across the globe. I've seen it more in Europe recently than Asia. It really is a great taxonomy for an internal cybersecurity risk framework that allows us to really speak the same language, measure the same programs, and focus on the things that are most important. And you've heard me say it before, and I'll say it until I retire, that companies really understand and need to understand that obviously backing up data, and we're a backup company, so it's really important to us. That's a component of your overall cybersecurity strategy. Focusing on the fundamentals is what I see as key to protecting companies. And if there are four things every company can do to protect themselves, they're things like patching operating systems, updating software, managing privileged users, application whitelisting, focusing on those lower stack technologies and processes will really help companies outrun the bear, if you will. Remember, these cyber crime gangs that are attacking our companies, our organizations, and our governments across the country are very organized entities, and they have costs. And anytime we can raise the cost of our adversaries, the better off and better protected our companies are going to be. So focusing on those fundamentals, preparing a resilient cybersecurity response, to me, are key to recovering from these inevitable attacks.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that too, I know in conversations that I've had with you before and also talks that we at Veeam have with customers, ransomware is certainly one threat, but it's not the only threat. There are disgruntled ex-employees who might seek to do damage on the way out the door. There is well-meaning mistakes that people can make that can compromise data. And the kind of tight controls and data security that you're talking about apply to lots of different kinds of threats too, not just ransomware, right?
Absolutely, which goes to the point I made earlier, Jeff, about really having a good understanding and situational awareness of your overall environment. You mentioned insider threats. I think that's going to be, it's going to continue to be a growing area of focus for companies. There are more and more anecdotes that I'm hearing about that involve trusted insiders being the gateway to ransomware attacks. So making sure you understand who your people are, how they're accessing your environment, how they're using their privileges, and managing them through the identification and authentication and authorization process throughout the life cycle of their employment has never been more critical.
Yep. So let's circle back to ransomware. We read a lot right now in the news about ransoms paid, and we also read a lot about other kinds of recovery costs, the cost of downtime or the actual cost of physically getting your data back in one way or another aside from ransoms. You mentioned earlier conversations that you're having around cyber insurance. Can you tell us what's happening with that particular insurance market today based on ransomware?
Yeah, sure. I recently concluded a podcast here at Veeam on this whole topic and gave my thoughts. I've been through the underwriting process for cyber insurance multiple times. I've seen the market grow and mature over time. Right now, I think that there's a bit of a sort of foundational shaking when it comes to cyber security insurance. There are more claims than ever. Insurance companies are paying out larger and larger claims today. And it's driven, I think, not a complete cratering of the cybersecurity insurance, but a retraction, if you will. Cyber insurance companies obviously are in the business of covering companies for profit. And right now, over the past 18 to 24 months, they've been operating at a break-even pace. So not a lot of money to be made. Largely due to the fact that there's a rise in claims, there's a change in the dynamic, dangerous threat environment that we're seeing. And I think just in 2021 alone, it's anticipated that the damages from cybercrime will be upwards of $6 trillion, which, if that were an economy, that would be the third largest economy in the world behind the United States and China. And then that's going to almost double by 2025. So cyber insurance companies they're becoming a bit more harder to bind. Cyber insurance policies are getting harder to bind. Cyber insurance underwriters are, through the underwriting process, becoming more and more prescriptive with companies, detailing exactly what types of controls companies need to have in place in a fully effective nature in order to be bound with a cyber security policy. So we're seeing an increase, sometimes a doubling and tripling of premiums. We're also seeing higher and higher retention rates, which is the amount, it's your insurance policy deductible, the amount that your company will be responsible to pay before the first dollar of cyber insurance becomes effective. So there have been significant challenges placed on the cyber insurance industry, and frankly, with with the nature of this ever-growing threat, specifically related to ransomware, I don't see any scenario where it will ever become easy again, like it was in the old days 10 years ago, to get a cyber insurance policy. These cyber insurance underwriters are going to continue to focus on your due diligence programs around cybersecurity, making sure that you are engaged in industry best practices in a way that not only protects your company, but protects your cyber insurance policyholder as well.
It's really interesting. I know when we were having these conversations, even as recently as a year ago, the conversations with customers were around, I'm going to get a discount on my premium if I can show certain kinds of controls are in place, certain kinds of backups or whatever. And now what I read, and I think what you just confirmed, is that it's not really about a discount, it's about being able to get insurance at all at this point.
I think that's right. And I think there are lots of reasons why companies, CEOs, boards of directors, CISOs are interested in gaining cybersecurity coverage, and that cyber insurance coverage plays an important role in any company's overall enterprise risk management approach. So sharing the potential costs of a cyber breach with an insurance company obviously is an important component of any ERM program. I do think that the establishment of these cybersecurity policies, as opposed to the establishment of those cybersecurity policies years ago, is a bit different. They're more expensive, not only in premiums, but as I mentioned, the retention rates are higher. But there are cases where there are investors, there are boards of directors, there are government regulators that want to make sure that you've done everything in your power to lay off on the risk of cybersecurity. The issue with ransomware is that it almost becomes an existential threat to small and mid-sized companies. And frankly, oftentimes, no matter how well you've structured your cyber insurance policy, you may be collecting a claim on a company that is no longer in existence. So, the overall value in terms of those existential threats to your company, the overall value of that policy and that potential claim may pale in comparison to the damage that is wrought by an attack that destroys your company.
Exactly. What's interesting, I read one insurance broker talking about this specifically for the UK market, and the damage that's being done frequently by ransomware attacks is to the most critical assets that a company has: their data, all of their records, their reputation in the market. And to your point, we've seen companies go into receivership. We've seen companies go bankrupt or suffer very, very serious lasting harm because of falling victim to attacks like this. There's one thing that comes up a lot in these conversations that at least I hear in the office of the CTO at Veeam in a technical capacity when we talk about this, and that is that more and more customers are getting specifically asked, are your backups protected? Are they immutable? Can you talk a little bit about immutable backups and how they play into what you're hearing from customers and insurers?
Yeah, sure. You heard me mention it before. Backup is very important, obviously, but it's only a component of your overall resiliency strategy around technology and cybersecurity. What's important about about immutability is that it's really the best way to guarantee that a last known good backup is being restored. We've talked in the past, Jeff, about these attacks having significant dwell times. In other words, these cyber attacks that involve ransomware are low and slow. And typically, the way they'll begin is through some type of phishing email where malicious code is activated by one of your users clicking on a link they shouldn't have clicked on. So that link will allow an attacker to install some malware, gain a toehold in your environment, and in many cases, that toehold will be undetected by the company or organization's cybersecurity program, which is unfortunate. And over time, what the attackers will do is they will pivot to other parts of the environment, they will escalate their privileges, and then they will install the payload that they attacked your company to install, and that is a cryptographic program that will encrypt your data, that will exfiltrate your data so that they can steal it, and then they can hold you hostage either through ransoming a decryption key or offering to return your data and assuring you that they won't post it publicly. So this takes an awful lot of time, and in some cases, these attacks progress over a period of 6 months to a year. I've seen attacks that I've been involved in as a responder evolve in time as long as 18 months. So that's what we consider the dwell time. When you consider the idea of backups as a strategy to protect yourself against ransomware, you've got to be able to have backups that support a full recovery from that period of dwell time. And the way that companies are doing this and restoring after a ransomware attack is through immutable backups. Immutability is simply, it's defined as unchangeable backups that can't be changed, that their integrity has been validated, and you know that they're a last known good backup. What we're hearing from customers is that they need immutability across different types of backup platform systems, whether it be tape or commodity hardware or service providers. In order to defeat today's modern cyber crime rings that are attacking us with ransomware, immutability has become a key feature and focus for companies like Veeam that are providing solutions for companies to recover from these threats.
Absolutely, and your point is well taken. For those of you that are listening to us today, we've got a lot of ways to do that here at Veeam. If your organization's using tape that's taken out of the library is available, all the way up to the most modern solutions involving S3 storage, either on-prem or in the cloud with object lock enabled. So there's a lot of different ways to skin that cat. I want to go back, Gil, and touch on something that you mentioned at the very beginning of our talk. We sort of talked about how big ransomware and other cyber crime has been in the news lately. I've seen an increasing focus on private-public partnership, on governments getting involved in actually fighting this threat. Can you talk a little bit about where that is now and maybe where you see that kind of government response in cooperation with private industry going as we move into 2022?
Yeah, and I'm smiling, Jeff, because in 2011 I was a member of the White House Cyber Interagency Policy Group that was trying to find resolution during the Obama administration for cyber threats and focusing the whole of government response. And I'm talking about the U.S. government. It's a little bit different, I think, in the UK and Ireland, although there seems to be less daylight between the various global governments when it comes to reducing this threat. For many, many years, the U.S. government has struggled with the idea of imposing risk on the gangs that are attacking our institutions with ransomware. There's been a bunch of fits and starts. There's been a number of red lines established. And over time, the issue has just gotten worse and worse and worse. So as a federal bureaucrat, I was disappointed to work through many attempts to try and impose risk on these criminal gangs, only to see the problem continue to rise and grow. Now, what you've seen over time is a deep focus on information sharing, cooperation, the establishment of key risk management frameworks across the globe to help companies focus on cybersecurity. And in the U.S., there's the NSA and the Department of Homeland Security. In the UK, there's their intelligence counterparts as well that are helping companies. And you're seeing a much deeper level of government and private industry cooperation to combat the cyber threat. What I need to see, and what I think what all of us need to continue to see, is a focus on establishing that risk, so that there isn't this sense of impunity when it comes to these criminal gangs attacking us, which is essentially where this has been over the last decade. Many of these gangs are operating in Eastern Europe, or the former Soviet Union countries, or Russia themselves. And typically law enforcement has been extremely challenged in bringing anyone identified in those jurisdictions to trial, to justice. So, that's because of a lack of extradition treaties, a lack of cooperation, global tensions, geopolitical concerns, and so forth. But recently here in the United States, I think many of us have been encouraged by what we're seeing out of our Department of Justice. In fact, just last week, there were two announcements, one from the Department of Justice and one from the FBI, that every tool in the toolbox is going to be re-leveraged in an attempt to bring these gangs to justice. Just this morning or last week in the Wall Street Journal here in the United States, long articles about indictments of those responsible for recent cyber ransomware attacks in Russia. And I think there are going to be significant diplomatic efforts to try and not only extradite those responsible for these attacks, but also diplomatic efforts to try and disrupt the infrastructure that supports these attacks, money laundering, the exchange of cryptocurrency, the sharing of malware, those types of things. So I think I think the bear has been poked once too many. I am optimistic that we will finally, after all of these years, start to impose risk on those that are responsible for these attacks. And frankly, I think that's the only way we get out of this mess.
I hope so too. Thank you so much. And please, for those of you listening to us today at the event, I hope that you have been putting your questions into the Q&A. We are about at the point where we need to wrap up today's talk. If you would like more information, please do go to Veeam's virtual booth. We do have experts standing by who can help you out. And Gil, I will let you sign off for us. Thanks everybody for joining. And Gil, I'll turn it over to you to say goodbye to everyone.
Great. Thank you very much for listening. Jeff, it's always a pleasure. I love to engage with you and engage with our customers. And obviously, if there's anything that we can provide you with in terms of deeper details on any of the things we've talked about, we're happy to do so.